You know what the most disappointing thing surrounding this and Dead City is how everyone has unfortunately but understandably checked out from this franchise, despite its sizable strides forward, because as it was last week, it is now. Daryl Dixon continues to feel like an admittedly predictable but surprising inclusion from this dystopian hellscape.
Bring it on.
As this episode gives us a little more insight into Isabel, Laurent and Daryl in extremely profound ways here, and gives us another piece to the puzzle of how much of the world dealt with the outbreak, and into how everyone perceived the apocalypse both before and during the aftermath of its impact, and in a rather obnoxious manner explores the themes of truth and lies and the consequences from them and how they can protect you in the best and worst of circumstances, and takes a look at the reality of Daryl's exploits and their effectiveness in an entirely different location. This one dissects our attention in two by casting us back into yesteryear, where we see Isabel's journey before the full extent of the outbreak erupted, where after scouting a few marks for money and drugs in a club, she makes her way home on the evening of the epidemic, and witnesses some of the horrors start to play out from rising walkers and chaos around. And as things get hairy, her boyfriend Quinn saves her, but he wants to escape to an isolated area in the countryside while this shit sorts itself out.
Comedy.
But she takes the chance to use him and retrieve her sister Lily, who is later revealed to be 7 months pregnant and is having complications around it.
Excuse me, the fuck did you just say?
The trio then make their way out of Paris, and once discovering Lily's condition, Quinn tries to convince Isabel to leave her behind with some professionals in the capital, but Izzy refuses to leave her behind, so instead steals Quinn's keys and makes off with his car, up to the Abbey, where along the way Lily got bit.
Fuck.
And this leads to her dying whilst in labour, and Père Jean makes the decision to try and save the baby from certain death by cutting it out of the reanimated corpse of Lily.
Drama.
And miraculously, the child survives and is given to Isabel, who chooses to name her nephew Laurent.
It all makes sense now.
And whilst these flashbacks unfold, the present day shows the struggle of Daryl trying to adjust to France and assume the same commanding position he eventually did before, whilst trying to remain detached from these people so that he doesn't have a reason to stay. However, Izzy, Laurent, Sylvie and a group of lost boys who captured the group initially eventually take to him and realise the strength and resolve that he possesses could be invaluable. But Daryl has other plans, and to speed through this mission, he made the sacrifice in the beginning to get rid of their horse due to a pack of walkers, and upon meeting the lost boys, realises they know a location that could hold another horse. But the leader of the group, Lou, initially dismisses his desire to investigate this location, later revealed to be a castle, until he convinces them that the castle could possess meds that they could use to save their maternal figure, Madame Dubois, who's on her deathbed and the kids are desperate to keep her alive. However, this is all a ruse, as Daryl knows that she isn't going to make it, but wants that horse inside.
The little Daleks.
The next day, he and Lou make their way over to the castle and discover it's surrounded by a moat of walkers that they'll need to climb over to get inside, and as they search for a means to do so, Daryl locks Lou safely away to tackle this alone. And inside discovers a young lad who's been imprisoned that went missing on a previous excursion out this way by the sole lunatic inside the building, RJ Gaines. And as it turns out, is a fellow American for Daryl, who was left out in France when shit blew up and believes that his family is still waiting for him until Daryl slaps him with reality. The realization of this loss leaves him unhinged, and as RJ's horse wagon breaks down, RJ tries to wrestle the gun away from Daryl when they both fall off the edge into the moat, which Daryl gets an assist from the kids to escape whilst RJ is devoured.
Oh, how unfortunate!
And we close on the group returning to discover that Madame Dubois passed while they were away, and they have a funeral for her before Daryl and the rest leave, with Laurent growing frustrated at their departure after finally finding a group of people his own age to get on with. So that was a rather basic summation given the number of little twists and turns that seemingly happen throughout this one, but I honestly cannot recommend this episode enough as a solo addition from The Walking Dead. If not for the present events that are fairly run-of-the-mill in a formula that I thought was reserved for The Mandalorian at this point in the tit-for-tat type deal, but for primarily the past events with Isabel that were excellently directed, showing the desperation we all expect from an apocalyptic event, but presenting things in such a frustrating manner that despite knowing her survival of this thus far, you can't help but scream out at the screen and tell her to run or fight. Isabel was someone I wanted to learn more from, but I wasn't expecting almost an entire half of an episode dedicated to her story, that admittedly only shows her life in the final hours of normalcy that explain why she chooses to live as she does now. But there's still much left for speculation currently surrounding what led her to how she was and what became of her parents. Where did the scars come from, and why hasn't she told Laurent about his lineage and the biological connections to her?
Don't give me excuses, give me results!
The fact that Isabel was a tortured figure much like Daryl before speaks to the parallels between them and the lengths that they'll both go to change and evolve, and more interestingly, the match that they could be on this journey, with their strength, resolve, determination and selflessness possibly being the crux for the story. Only right now, Daryl has lost his faith and is being guided towards it once more through all the actions around him, whereas Izzy discovered faith through the survival of her nephew that seemed almost impossible, and he's acted as almost a son for her and equally a mother to him, giving her a reason to continue. The ingenuity of her character hasn't entirely materialised yet, but there are glimmers there, with the sleight of hand tricks and decision to take Lily to the nuns immediately implies that she has world smarts and a clear sense of awareness, but there's still much of the series to go, where we could see more from her and maybe more character traits that correlate with Daryl. I don't have much else to say on her character just yet, but I'm fascinated to discover more about her and the survival skills that she carries. Plus that little reveal about Laurent being part of a legacy that seems to be a mislead in his life as a sign of protection was expected oddly, but adds necessary drama to the plot, though this little ruse seems to be receding faster than ice cream and heat based on Laurent's hostile responses to her. But while we're on the topic of Izzy, I just want to highlight the remarkable feat of creativity from the writers here, with an astonishing amount of subtlety initially in the reveal of the walkers from Isabel's point of view that genuinely impressed me for The Walking Dead as something that I don't think I've seen before. From the errant screams in a nightclub to the distance attacks over the bridge to possibly one of my favourite moments of the franchise so far of the slow descent of the underground carts that gives enough to tell us what's occurring but not enough for her to become aware of the horrors unfolding was genuinely genius. And that then proceeds to unfold as she ascends to the streets of Paris, that made the passage of time feel instantaneous for her when in her shoes everything seemed relatively normal above just a few minutes before, all worked incredibly well to shroud this in an air of confusion from her perspective. It made for a fantastic visual set piece that heightened the tension and held suspense and drew you in as you want to understand more despite being aware of what happens next. But the immersive design to this was phenomenal for this long-standing corpse of a series that, as I said last week, had seemingly run out of creative steam by the final hour, has once found life again. Moving on though, Daryl's arc in this is to become one with everyone again and learn not to close himself off as he did before, and almost learning about the consequences of lying here too. Daryl proves continually to be intelligent and practical, but when it comes to logistics he can be quite stubborn, which isn't new to the show, as we see throughout this and the flagship series that when pushed to achieve something the man is capable of almost anything and is rather crafty. But if we cast our minds back to episodes like Chupacabra that many consider the highlight of Daryl's journey and made him such an endearing character, it demonstrated that he's more effective as part of a team or in low-risk solo operations.
No, he's got a point.
As he went it alone there without consideration for himself, which is a testament to his selfless mentality, but there was no backup, and he almost died, and that proved to be the case here again, where he could have fought off a strong number of the walkers in the moat, but eventually he would have been overwhelmed had it not been for Lou and the others. Daryl is by nature a protector and one who does get attached when he can see the inherent value to someone, and he's proven to be strongest when he embraces that, but here he was just fixated on obtaining that horse that even finding the young lad locked away didn't faze him like it normally would, and he let his guard down around RJ, which almost cost him, and he chose to lock away Lou instead of keeping her around as backup, almost lying to himself thinking that that was the best decision, but it actually could have killed him. Daryl wants to get home and complete his mission for Judith and finding Rick and Michonne, but it's not going to work if he keeps making reckless decisions like this. His objective right now serves to get him off the island, but it's also blinding him and his ability to perceive things correctly, like trusting people and withholding the truth for the right reasons. The idea behind this writing is to tell us that his desperation is deep, so much so that he's compromising himself as well as other people, evidenced by the fact that he would use a young woman's desperation for selfish gain, then he didn't even check the wagon before moving, or think about where he was leaving the gun, or even how he'd escaped the moat without support. His mission and homesickness has taken over and is clouding his vision, for want of a better word, that it is causing him to become destructive. So the best thing for him to do is just to ride it out, take things as they come, and get himself back into that headspace of being a protector once again. And in doing that, his team will take care of the survival part, and he seemed to realise that by the end, talking things out with Laurent in the only way he knows how. And speaking of the young lad, who is in fact Isabel's nephew, a creative choice of which didn't really come as a surprise to me given how protective she is of him, but my surprise did come from the fact that he wasn't actually hers. A theory I possessed after last week, but what was more shocking was the fact that the lad survived birth by Walker, an idea we haven't really seen explored before in The Walking Dead, with the closest being Laurie in season 3, having seen C-section for Judith and dying during that event, but even then she was still more alive than Lily was here, so it truly was a miracle moment that most likely inspired Isabel's turn to God. But in all honesty, I don't really understand why Izzy hasn't been upfront with the lad here, or even for that matter prepared him for the brutality of this world and how honest people can actually be. He's never had this much exposure before, so it will likely be a bit of a culture shock, and that's something Izzy and the others should have prioritised above poems and prayers, because now he's gonna be a kid in a candy store and want to explore everything, wishing to stick with others his own age, and that will no doubt generate friction between all parties going forward, which could complicate matters for Daryl if the realisation comes to him of who he is.
Good job.
I can't say that the Ron has grabbed me just yet, but with time that could turn around. But as for everything else in this, it was a lot of heavy messaging about truth and lies and the impact of them and how you use them. Like how Lily's lie about her pregnancy would go on to fuck things up, then Izzy lying to Quinn about leaving Lily, to Daryl's lie about the meds and the false hope that that brought, then Sylvie's lie over the horse and how that brought mistrust in LaRon's eyes, and then lastly Lou's lie to the young man in her group who thought his brother was still alive.
Lies. Oh, lies!
It's all rather clunky in this, and the implied nature of its focus is to only use it when necessary, but there was no linear message here other than honesty is the best approach, and I liked what we saw here as a solid reminder of the consequences and backlash that can come from a lie. But I realised something interesting here, and that was with both Daryl and Lou's lies, and how they both actually come from a place of sincerity that, while deceitful, offer a lot more flexibility and comfort to the recipient, as you don't know if the meds could help or not, nor if the young man's brother is still alive, as they're both variable, and leave a promise of something better, as opposed to the other lies I pointed out that have irrefutable truths. So there is that. But alongside this, I get the feeling as well as that they want to convey how Daryl's approach to tasks works when he knows the lay of the land and is trusting to those around him, but being a literal fish out of water here means he's going to fumble around more than he normally would, and he's going to try and tackle this as hard as he can on his own to get himself out of there, without putting time into building a connection with those around him that could save his life. However, despite the mixed messaging, the interwoven storytelling is always going to be a decent way to explore personal trials and tribulations within a show like this, as you gather context in between tense and dramatic moments that keeps you going whilst refining the information to only what's necessary. Like Isabel's naivety at the beginning of the apocalypse that cost her sister works to become a source of strength to persevere and protect her nephew from the looming dangers now. To see the School of the Lost Boys was quite a surprise, as that's not something we often see in this universe, but to realise how creative they've become by hooking up TVs to exercise bikes works to display true ingenuity that I have to imagine is what Michonne's friend could have become in the flagship series as opposed to Children of the Corn. The little tag-on of Cadron returning to the Abbey is just there to set us up for no doubt the closing act when he catches up with Daryl and the others, but honestly just felt rather tacked on given the basis of this episode and its central focus discussing nothing to do with the cause. But the lack of that element was somewhat disappointing, as we still know nothing about how Daryl came to arrive here and what he's running away from, but there's always next time. And generally the tone of this was enjoyable with much to indulge in, with the addition of RJ being rather interesting, giving us that closeted survivor archetype who thinks that this is just an isolated incident, and the guy playing him did a decent job at selling the confusion and frustration. The cinematography was excellent, especially with the early shots centered around Isabel's discovery of the outbreak and its effect, and I'm excited to see where they take the story next, and if Daryl will truly make it off the island once and for all. Though let's be honest, there's a season 2 already, so that's highly doubtful. Anyway, that's all I've got for this one. Thank you so much for stopping by. If you like this, then go ahead and leave a thumbs up and subscribe if you're new, and until next time everyone, take care, and I'll catch you later.